Washington announced that he would not accept a third term. Highly significant. Once he had announced that, it opened up the election of the president to the political process. And by 1796, you already had a two-party system that had emerged. And so the second president of the United States, John Adams, was the first president to be elected as a nominee of a political party. He was a Federalist. Okay, John Adams, the second president of the United States, was elected as a Federalist. Okay? And then in the election of 1800, just 4 years later, you had the first instance in which presidential and vice presidential candidates ran as a ticket. Okay? Now, what the Constitution requires, more on that in just a second, what the Constitution requires is that in order to be elected president, a candidate must receive a majority of the electoral vote. Okay? The Constitution requires that in order to be elected president, the winning candidate must receive a majority of the electoral vote. What is a majority? What is the standard or the threshold of a majority? 50% plus one, half plus one, right? The original provisions of the Constitution provided that the candidate who wins the second highest number of electoral votes becomes vice president. Everybody got those two little factual bits of information? Okay. So, that set the stage for the election of 1800. Okay? So this is the first time that you have presidential and vice presidential candidates running as a ticket. I provided you with some nice pictures here to enjoy the story I'm about to tell you. Okay? The Federalist ticket, the presidential candidate was John Adams. Okay? And his vice presidential running mate was a man by the name of Charles Pinckney. The Republican ticket consisted of Thomas Jefferson, the presidential candidate, and his running mate, Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr is a name that some of you might recognize. It seems to be a name that some people recognize, and maybe you'll recall the significance of Aaron Burr as I tell you the story. Okay. So when the electors met in their state capitals, there were 16 states at that time. Okay. In the election of 1800, there were 16 states. When the electors met in their state capitals, they cast their ballots for the ticket of Adams, Pinckney, or the ticket of Jefferson and Burr. And so when the electoral votes were counted, it ended up in a tie. So no candidate got the necessary majority. Everybody with me? The Constitution provides that if no candidate gets a majority of the electoral vote, then the election of the president will be decided by the House of Representatives, with each state delegation getting one vote. In other words, Virginia gets one vote, Rhode Island gets one vote, Pennsylvania gets one vote, Georgia gets one vote, etc. Okay? So the tie was not between Jefferson and Adams, the two presidential candidates. The tie was between Thomas Jefferson and his running mate, Aaron Burr, because the electors did not distinguish between electoral votes that were cast for president and those that were cast for vice president. So we're going to rub out these two guys because they're no longer in the picture. Okay? Now we go to the House of Representatives, and Aaron Burr decides, even though he was clearly Jefferson's vice presidential running mate, he decides that he wants to be president. Okay. One of the things maybe that you should know about Aaron Burr, or that some of you may know about Aaron Burr, is he's the guy who killed Alexander Hamilton in that famous duel. Right? Now, why did Hamilton and Aaron Burr duel? Well, because they hated each other. They hated each other politically. They hated each other personally. Hamilton viewed Burr as a thorough scoundrel, and he was. Okay? And he publicly impugned Burr's character, and that allowed Burr to goad Hamilton into a duel and cost Hamilton his life. But Burr was much better with firearms than Hamilton was, and so it was an easy win for Burr in that duel. At any rate, this particular episode, what happened was Burr decides, here, I'll tell you what kind of a scoundrel Burr was. Burr, even though he was clearly Jefferson's vice presidential running mate, he decided he wanted to be president. He waged a little campaign. And it took something like 36 ballots, I think, in the House of Representatives before Jefferson ultimately emerged as the winner. And it only happened because there was a stalemate in the New York delegation, and none other than, you guessed it, Alexander Hamilton stepped in to break the stalemate in the New York delegation. Now, Hamilton didn't like Jefferson either. Okay? Hamilton was Jefferson's bitter political rival. Right? Hamilton was the leader of the Federalist Party, and Jefferson was the leader of the Republican Party, and they were almost always at odds with one another. Okay? But Hamilton at least believed that Jefferson was a man of integrity. Burr was a scoundrel. And so it was one of those, like people talk about today, they have to hold their nose and vote for the lesser of two evils, right? Hamilton decided that it was better the devil that is Jefferson versus the devil that is Burr. Okay? Anyway, so that broke the tie of the stalemate in the New York delegation, and Jefferson ended up becoming the president. He won the, I have the vote totals for you there, 10 state delegations voting for Jefferson, 4 voting for Burr, and 2 casting no vote. Okay? So Jefferson ends up as the winner. But here's the legacy of that election, why this election is so important to us in the context of the broader discussion that we're having here. It led to a realization that the Electoral College, as it was created by the framers of the Constitution, there were some significant failures associated with the design of that system. The first is a mechanical failure of the Electoral College. And what I mean by that is they didn't anticipate presidential and vice presidential candidates running as running mates. And so they didn't anticipate there being ties between presidential and vice presidential candidates. Now, they fixed that pretty easily. They fixed that with the 12th Amendment. The 12th Amendment is added to the Constitution after the election of 1800 because of the election of 1800. So you're not going to have that problem anymore. They fixed that. But the broader failure, the philosophical failure, is that they didn't anticipate not only the emergence of democratic politics, this idea that you're going to have this elite body of wise men who are going to sit around and deliberate and discuss. That wasn't feasible anymore. It was you already had these democratic impulses in place. Okay? And furthermore, they didn't anticipate the emergence of a party system. By the election of 1800, the electors aren't in a position to deliberate. They're just essentially party hacks. They're going to vote for whoever their party's candidate is. And the framers of the Constitution never anticipated that. Okay? So, let's fast forward. Any questions about that particular episode?